Good afternoon, everyone. We are Team Aristotle. I'm here with Sharif Masood, Mohsen Dezanian, and Peter Vachunas, and my name is Shavala Kahanda. I'd like to welcome you all to our press conference. Our CEO, Dan Schroeder, will be joining us shortly, and I'd like to remind you all that there are no questions during the press conference. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Don Schroeder, the CEO of Tim Hortons. As you may know, contaminated coffee beans have been found in some of our products. When the contaminated coffee beans were discovered in our supply chain, we launched an immediate recall to keep the beans from consumption. And then we shut down our coffee roasting facilities. Tragically, our product has been linked to illnesses and posed health risks to our consumers. To Canadians who have been ill and to families who have been affected, I express my sincerest apologies. Words cannot begin to express my sadness for your ill health. Tim Hortons is a community of people who live in a culture of food safety and quality. We have an unwavering commitment to keep your food safe with standards well beyond regulatory requirements. But this week, our best efforts failed, and we are deeply sorry. This is the toughest situation we have faced in 45 years as a company. We know this has shaken your confidence in us. I commit to you that our actions are guided by putting your best interests first. As of this hour, we've already accomplished a number of important steps to mitigate this crisis. Our first stage was to implement a crisis management team consisting of myself, heads of department, and other stakeholders within and external to the firm. We have decided to, and have already carried out, a shutdown of our roasting facilities and a freeze of the supplier who sourced us these beans, as well as a complete recall of all products that are linked to this contamination. We have addressed this issue to our employees, and we are working closely with stakeholders to ensure we are transparent and consistently communicating new information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear members of the Board of Directors, important. We'd like to thank you for the opportunity as this cross-functional team to analyze and assess the crisis situation that our company is facing currently. And we would like to come to the conclusion to recommend how to mitigate this crisis and how to handle any crisis such as this in the future. Before we begin, I'd like to touch on the current situation. We have discovered that there have been contaminated coffee beans. The media and the public health officials have become aware of the situation, and the contamination has led to severe illness. Before we begin, I'd like to highlight Tim Hortons' supply chain model. We have multiple coffee bean suppliers, but our majority of the coffee that we provide is a blend, which means that the contamination at any level would impact our entire coffee supply across Canada. Before we go any further, the key implications of such a crisis would be our sales operations, because we have shut down the plant, the share price, and obviously public safety. Those would be the immediate implications. While the trust and confidence of consumers is very important to us, because Tim Hortons is a solid brand in the Canadian market, and this crisis will have some impact on it in the short run. If it is not mitigated appropriately, it will carry on in the long run as well. The key stakeholders to this crisis, from our perspective, would be our operations, our consumers, suppliers, the Public Health and Safety Board, and our franchisees. These stakeholders will be mostly impacted, and will be impacted immediately and most strongly by this crisis.
To effectively manage this crisis, there will be a few things we must do immediately. Within the first few hours, we must create a crisis management team to debrief the board, you. Thankfully, Mr. Schroeder has already taken the steps to accomplish this task. It will consist of Mr. Schroeder, the CEO, our department heads, public relations, legal counsel, and a public health expert to assess the contamination. The second step is to shut down our roasting and blending facility, and to recall all of the products from our franchises and other outlets. As well, we must issue an internal memo. The fabric of the company is based on the employees. They need to have a clear understanding of the situation so they can still trust the management that is leading them. Lastly, we must have a press conference. We accomplished that task a few minutes ago. This crisis management team, over the next few days, weeks, and months, will be in charge of creating contingency plans, public relations, communications, stakeholder relations, operations, conducting legal matters, and evaluating their own performance after the crisis for future crises so we can improve our own operations. Our immediate contingency plans, taking into account that our supply chain has been disrupted, is to either, one, outsource our coffee roasting facilities to another vendor, or create a temporary joint venture with a coffee provider such as in-house. For the first option, in fact, both options, the key strategy, or the key goal of the strategy is to have a less impact on coffee sales. We want our customers returning back to Tim Hortons. We don't want them going to one of their competitors. And this is key for both strategies. However, there are disadvantages for both. For the first strategy, there is a risk of us losing our proprietary technology. Our blending is very important to us, our quality is very important to us, but we want to have the Tim Hortons taste all the time, and we don't want anyone else to know how we do it. And the quality of the product is very important for our consumers. We want them to have consistency every time they come back to Tim Hortons. And for the second strategy, there is a risk of us losing our customer loyalty. If they like in-house more, which I don't see why they would, we might end up losing them in the future. After our immediate actions, within the first week, there is some more work to do. Our public relations will become very important. We have to update the company website. We have to transmit communication and information to our stakeholders and our consumers, as well as run a live blog on the website. This will let us transmit information in real time so that everybody is always updated. And we have to establish a strong connection with the media and schedule frequent press conferences with Mr. Schroeder over here so that there is a clear picture of transparency and communication and cooperation. And by establishing a hotline, we can have our consumers call in with any concerns, and we can voice our own expert opinions on what is happening with the prices and with contamination. Furthermore, our relationship with the Public Health and Safety Board is extremely important. Not only can they educate us about the contamination so that we can further educate our consumers and stakeholders, but they can also identify our operational risks. So in the future, we understand what happened with contamination and what steps we can take to avoid it so this crisis never happens again. Also, our operations. They must begin sterilization of all of our roasting facilities immediately. If the contamination reached our Canadian or American roasting facilities, they have to be cleaned out as soon as possible so we can ramp up our supply chain as fast as we can. And also, we have to cut off supply from a contaminated source immediately so that no further contamination occurs.
In the long term, we need to consider a few things. The first being the legal aspect of our plans. So it's very important that we stress the urgency surrounding the settlement of lawsuits. And we really want to be able to settle our lawsuits within 6 to 8 months. Also, we want to always remain accountable and make sure that we're consistently re-evaluating our operational risk, that we implement stricter quality control with our suppliers, and obviously we want to constantly re-evaluate our crisis management team and its procedures. We'd like to take a few lessons from Maple Leaf. As Canadians, we all know and are all very familiar with the listeriosis crisis that happened a while ago with Maple Leaf. And we'd just like to point out a few interesting things and how they handled their strategy. So if we look in about August 2008 is when really we saw, this was pre-contamination. And as you'll notice, the stock price obviously immediately dropped as soon as the press release came out. But 6 months later, in February of 2009, we see all of a sudden, at this point is when the final lawsuit was actually settled. And I'd like to point out that in about October of 2008 is when the economic recession really began. So while the rest of the economy was on a downward spiral, due to Maple Leaf's crisis implementation and strategy, they actually observed an increase in share price during that time. And we feel that if you implement our strategies as recommended, we would see the same sort of trend in share price and share value. So in conclusion, we'd like to just drive home a few key messages. Always be ready for a crisis. Have a crisis management team on board at all times. Accept responsibility. Be transparent. Be quick to act. And always reevaluate procedures post-crisis so that you're always on top of things at all times. Thank you very much.
Could you flesh out a bit how you're going to, I guess, mitigate the impact to investors and creditors of this crisis? You put up the graph, which was actually quite helpful in terms of the Maple Leaf precedent, but maintaining access to capital even through the crisis, I imagine, is quite important. And what's your strategy in terms of maintaining access to credit, to shareholder capital and the like?
I'll take that question. I think the most important question to ask when a crisis like this occurs is how to ensure the survival of the firm and treat the entity as a living, breathing organization. So your shareholders and your stockholders are going to have no value in the firm if you don't treat this situation properly and identify the key stakeholders and act accordingly. And so I think it's important to recognize that your consumers are your number one. It's the number one issue here: their health and their well-being. And so, to your question, sir, I think the crisis management team would first and foremost focus on these issues before they look to maintaining their credit lines or building a relationship with the corporate bankers, et cetera.
How are you dealing with the contaminated product that may be in the supply chain at the stores already?
We've already called for a recall of all products at the store, as well as all other Tim Hortons outlets, whether it's a non-Tim Hortons location. And we've also, by issuing a press conference and by issuing public service announcements and making the public and the media aware that there might be contaminated product, we are, in effect, warning them to either return that or to deal with it accordingly. But for all the product that is already on store shelves, that is being recalled.
And what will you be serving the customers who are in line at Tim Hortons right now?
So, in terms of our contingency plans, we discussed possibilities of continuing to serve coffee. However, if we do think about the long-term operations of Tim Hortons and the consumer as the ultimate stakeholder, we would consider a contingency of shutting down our coffee services for a period of as long as it takes to completely remove the contamination from our roasting facilities. Again, in the short term, this might impact our stock price as well as our return. But we think in the long run, our consumers will really appreciate the effort that we're putting into ensuring their safety, their health, and we feel that that might be the correct path to take.
I think your focus on the short term is appropriate, but just give me a sense of how you think this impacts the long term, whether it be growth strategy as well as supply strategy.
So we did actually think about our growth strategy, and Tim Hortons is actually actively pursuing growth strategies in different markets, and we recognize that this will actually impact in the sense that we'll have a delay in our ability to grow, supposedly in the U.S. or in international markets. We currently struggle with brand recognition beyond Canada, and then when we have a brand reputation issue in Canada, we need to deal with that first, and then move on. And once that's fixed, once we have regained investor and consumer confidence, we can then go on to attain our other strategies in the long run.
I've got a question that relates to your short-term strategy. In our business, being Tim Hortons, a week seems like a lifetime in the life of the customers. I think we've got minutes to react, not a week for the short-term strategy. And I'm just trying to figure out how, for 28,900 locations, we can execute this in much less than a week's period of time.
Well, our implementation plan involves within the first few hours to already issue the recall. The first 4 steps, I think that's number 3, is for that to happen immediately. How long it takes ultimately for the product to get back from the franchisors to us. Might take weeks, but they will know immediately as soon as we find out. Our invitation strategies for the week periods are more for public relations and communication. In terms of the safety, it happens as soon as we find out, within hours of the contamination being found.
And if I can add on to that, sir, the reason why we posted contingency plans is for that particular reason. If Tim Hortons, if the board decides that there's no possible way we can go a week without sales, we did explore possible other options, and whether that be outsourcing the roasting facilities so that you can maintain that blend and then have it sent out to your franchises, or perhaps offering another coffee product. However, what we did is show the advantages and disadvantages of both. And at the end of the day, what we've concluded is that although it may be a material impact on your financial statements, it is all about protecting the firm as a whole.
Any consideration to a no-name brand coffee for the period of time that this process goes through?
I can take that one. We did consider that, and I think what we were looking for, though, and what you saw on the disadvantages side, is the problem around quality, and we struggle to ensure that that quality is going to be there, and obviously we don't have any control behind it. And so with a name brand, you are buying, you're presumably buying high quality, good taste, and all the other things that come with it. But that is another option that we could explore further.
If I can just add to that, on the issue of transparency, and the key factor with the crisis is to be always transparent with your stakeholders and with your customers. So if that decision were to be made to switch to a no-name brand, then the CEO would have to be very transparent about that, saying to the public that because we have a contamination issue, and that because we are sterilizing the facilities at the time, we cannot provide you with our signature coffee, but we will continue to provide excellent service and all our other excellent products, except we will switch to a no-name brand for a period of whatever weeks it takes to do the cleaning operations and resume normal operations. But only when that transparency is present would we give serious consideration to switching to a different brand.
What else are you going to do to reassure the customers? Because they're not going to focus just on coffee. They're going to feel like everything is contaminated. How are you going to reassure them in your stores?
We could, part of the plan could be to not only clean the facilities, but also do a cleansing of the stores, but at later stages. But I think if we, again, are transparent and honest with the customers at all times, we tell them that this has been the issue with one of our suppliers, this is how we have solved the issue, and if we are just honest and transparent and keep them up to date, just like Maple Leafs Food did throughout this crisis, they will eventually gain trust back. It may be a process, it may take a few months, but they will eventually gain trust back in the brand and in all the other products.
If I could just add to that, I believe that the transparency is the root of this, and if we're open and honest about what has happened, it'll optimally lend trust to the other things that we say. So if we say nothing else is contaminated, but we've been open about everything else, hopefully that's some cause for people to believe us and to continue to purchase our other products.
Do you see a specific role for franchisees in reassuring customers?
Absolutely. They're sort of the front line connection with the customers, especially regular customers that come into the store. They probably have relationships built up. And I think that part of the process would be to train the franchisees in how to handle the situation, how to address concerns, and the proper way to answer any issues that may arise.
And as we had mentioned in the presentation, one of the key things we would look at within that first day is operations. And within operations falls your franchisees. And we discussed about the need to, right away when you're pushing out a letter to your employees, you need to be pushing out information to your franchisees as well, so keeping them informed, and that will then get passed on down to the consumer.